Nigeria's security landscape and Africa's shifting geopolitics collide in two stories that define this moment: American airstrikes in Sokoto and China's renewed charm offensive across the continent. At the heart of both is the same question: whose power reshapes African lives and who takes responsibility when it does? The recent US strike in Sokoto was sold as a blow against the Islamic State, but the reality on the ground is more complicated. The dominant actors there are the Lakarawa and Al-Qaeda-linked faction, a group with roots in local communities that turned to outside fighters in desperation during years of banditry. They came in as helpers, then turned their guns on the same communities that invited them in, enforcing a harsh literalist reading of the Quran and embedding themselves in part of Sokoto since around 2017. Some analysts and even US officials have lumped this faction together with the Islamic State West African or SAIA offshoots, but these are distinct networks operating in different theaters like Niger's Tilaberi region. That mislabeling matters. If Washington believes it is eating the Islamic State proper, it frames the strike as part of a global counter-terror campaign rather than a more complex local insurgent ecosystem. It also feeds the narrative that the US is acting to protect Christians in Nigeria, even though most anti-Christian violence has historically been concentrated in the north-central and northeast, not in Sokoto, the symbolic heart of northern Nigerian Islam. So why Sokoto? From a military planner's perspective, it is easier terrain. The state is more sparsely populated than the Middle Belt, and Nigerian Air Force operations there are relatively limited, which reduces the risk of overlapping missions and high civilian casualties. That makes it a safer theater for US drones and jets to operate, especially for a White House eager to show it is acting decisively against jihadist groups without triggering images of large-scale collateral damage. US officials have signaled that this was only the first in a series of such operations backed by persistent surveillance flights across northern Nigeria. Abuja in turn has tried to frame the strike as a partnership, insisting Nigeria was consulted and its sovereignty respected. Washington has not echoed that language, and the gap between the two narratives suggests something closer to unilateral action dressed up after the fact to save face for the Nigerian government. This is not the first time. Ever since Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern over religious freedom, officials in Abuja have often scrambled to present uncomfortable US moves as joint decisions rather than admissions of domestic security failure. On the ground, the immediate question is whether the strike deters or provokes. In the days that followed, Islamic State factions stepped up attacks on Christian communities in Adamawa and across the border in parts of Cameroon, explicitly framing them as retaliation for Sokoto. Yet, Christians in these regions were never safe to begin with. They have long been targets of jihadist violence. The deeper indictment lies not in US overreach alone, but in the Nigerian state application. With months of American reconnaissance in the skies, Abuja had time to anticipate blowback and move to protect vulnerable communities, and did not. The result is a bitter paradox. A foreign power intervenes on Nigerian soil in the name of security, while Nigerian citizens continue to die because their own government fails to act decisively before and after the bombs fall. The drama in Sokoto is unfolding alongside another headline-grabbing move: the US operation in Venezuela to remove its president and the broader outline posture of the Trump administration in America's backyard. To understand why Caracas sits in Washington's crosshairs while Abuja does not, it helps to go back 2 centuries to the Monroe Doctrine. Announced in 1821 under President James Monroe, it carved Latin America out as a sphere where European powers were not welcome and where Washington claimed a special right to intervene, a logic later hardened by Theodore Roosevelt's corollary in 1913. That mindset never really disappeared, it only went quiet. In the wake of the Venezuela operation, senior Trump aide Stephen Miller reportedly argued that America is a superpower and should act like one, a blunt restatement of the same doctrine in contemporary language. By that logic, Venezuela is not just an oil-rich state, it is contested ground inside a zone the US has long treated as its privileged domain. African capitals, including Abuja, sit outside that crossfire. Problems with an African government may invite pressure, sanctions, covert meddling, or diplomatic isolation, but not usually the kind of overt boots-on-the-ground regime change seen in Latin America. If any African leader were likely to face that level of hostility, it would arguably have been someone like South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, whose government has clashed with Washington on Russia, China, naval drills, Israel, and polarizing narratives about attacks on white farmers. Yet, even there, foreign policy hawks in Washington have not seriously pushed for an outright ejection of a president. Nigeria's own history with the US underscores the point. There have been sharp disagreements over Angola during the Cold War, the Abacha regime's human rights abuses, or Washington's refusal to sell arms during the height of the Boko Haram war. But ties never really broke. Even under sanctions, Abuja looked eastward for partners without slamming the door on the West, even under strain. It remained broadly Western-facing in outlook and diplomacy. That makes Nigeria a difficult candidate for dramatic US overthrow. Relations may be tense, but they are not existentially hostile. As for oil, Washington does not need to topple the Nigerian government to access it. Production is already extensively hedged, and new feeds from places like Yankari in Gombe or Ogoni would almost certainly fight American buyers without coercion, giving US financial muscle and Nigeria's need for revenue. In confidence telling, if the US wants Nigerian crude, it can simply buy it. There is no unique resource on Nigerian soil that Washington cannot source elsewhere. The theatres seen in Venezuela are therefore about doctrine, signaling an hemisphere politics, not a template that will automatically be applied to Africa. Together, the Sokoto strikes and the Venezuela operation sketch a world where American power is both highly selective and deeply rooted in old strategic maps. Nigeria may feel that power in the form of drones in its skies and diplomats at its doors, but the real test remains internal. Whether its own government chooses to protect its citizens and define its sovereignty rather than letting foreign actors and armed groups write the story for it.